to YouTube, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Okay, so welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest here is Jill Eickmann, the founder of Lila, a improv group and an improv studio and an improv education.
Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast.
An improv education group. And I've been going for the last month, and it's been really exciting. I've learned a lot for myself. The whole reason I got into improv was to actually help me do better on this podcast and become more spontaneous and kind of free flowing. And so far I've just fallen in love with the improv process that I've decided to do it for fun. So Jill, welcome to the show. I know you have some really important things to say about creativity and stress, and yeah, welcome.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Sure. And I know you have a show coming up. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I produce a festival every year. This will be our 6th festival this year, called Revisor Fest. So it's an all women's improv festival. And it's my little pet project to get more women involved in the improv community and just have more of an active women's presence on the improv stage. And it's in April, end of April, April 25th through the 28th.
And what's it called again?
It's called Revisor Fest.
Great. And how many times have you guys run it?
So this will be our 6th year. Yeah,
okay.
Year 6.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so let's get right into it. What is your view, or what is your definition of creativity, if you have one?
Yeah. Well, improv is all about process, which I really love. Actually, I'll talk more about that a little bit later, but improv is where process and product merge, especially when you perform it as an art form in front of an audience. And creativity, I believe, is that investment in process. So many people see creativity as like a form of self-care. It feels really relaxing to just paint for painting's sake or write for writing's sake. And creativity allows you to just tap into that authentic place inside of yourself where, it just wants to explode, something just wants to come out of you, and you carve that time and space for yourself to let that happen. And what I really love about improv is not only it's a creative process, but it's a collaborative process. So it's where everybody's creativity can come together and play together.
That's something we haven't really talked about on the show, is the difference and similarity between individual creativity and group creativity. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's fun, and I think that when you're being inspired by others, when your creativity is coming from a place of inspiration, it allows you to, really shut down that voice of your inner critic and judge your ideas, because you're really focusing outside of yourself and allowing yourself to be inspired by other people's ideas. So it's a fun process.
And what do you think about that individual sense of creativity? Do you have any kind of individual pursuits of yourself that you have, maybe painting or other kind of individual creative pursuits?
Not right now. I used to journal a lot. I'm a mom right now. So time is precious. Of a very active toddler. But I really do like journaling a lot. Having that time and space to just like let my thoughts come out and just free write has been really helpful for me as an artist over the years.
And then what is this connection between creativity and stress? So you talked a little bit about creativity and group creativity. Because a lot of people view improv as, particularly people who have never done improv before, as something that's highly stressful and kind of have a lot of blocks towards it. What is the role of stress in this creative process, would you say?
Yeah, I really believe stress is about that worry about the future, and having little or no control of an outcome. A lot of folks that I work with lately, I do a lot of corporate improv team building. So many of my clients are folks that have never done improv before. And a lot of times I get hired for these team building gigs because the company is concerned about their employees going out and doing presentations. A lot of folks are scared to death, like they're hard workers, they're very smart, they are really good at their job, but once they have to go out out and do a presentation, like they start to freeze up and freak out.
Mm-hmm.
So I get hired by companies to help them with that. And a lot of those folks talk about that feeling of like, hey, I know what I'm talking about, but I'm scared to death of that question where I'm put on the spot, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Or what if the slideshow dispenser doesn't work, you know? What do I do if there's some change that happens? How do I prepare for that? So I believe what improv teaches us is to prepare for the unprepared, right? Prepare for those moments that are going to be unknown. We have no idea what's going to happen. Prepare for change. Prepare for moments of like, oh crap, you know, all those moments. And you can. It's a skill. It's a muscle. You can be prepared in that sense. You get so confident in your ability to react on the fly, to react confidently, to react truthfully, to be very present. And it is a skill. It's a muscle that you can prepare for.
That reminds me, you talked about kind of how improv can help us to prepare for the unexpected. Right. And a lot of people, I've heard it said before that people's two main fears are public speaking and death. Yes. And death is the ultimate unknown. So that's kind of like the biggest unknown. And then the fact that people kind of put public speaking up there in that same category, because it can also, I imagine it leads people to believe that they have a social reputation, and that if they do something wrong, they will lose that social reputation, which for humans as social beings is probably one of those things that's closest to death in terms of how bad it feels.
It's a social death. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I do an exercise a lot for my team buildings. I call it everybody go. And I have everybody go around the circle and I say, this is spontaneity training. We're going to do a form of spontaneity training. We're going to go around the circle and everybody come up, don't come up, sorry. Don't clap. You're going to do a spontaneous sound and movement, right? And I say, remember, it's spontaneity training. So just let something pop out of you. That's it. And then historically, every single time I'll check in afterwards and I go, okay, truth time, like who planned the spontaneous sound and movement, And it's really hard, it's really hard not to plan, right? So we tell people like, don't plan, don't think, don't, and what do you do instead? Right. So then we'll talk about that and be like, okay, I told you not to plan, but how do you really allow yourself to surrender to the unknown and be really spontaneous? And usually what that comes from is being focused outside of yourself rather than being focused internally about all those thoughts of things that you should and shouldn't do. You're focusing outside of yourself and you're putting your attention on your audience, on your fellow players, on your surroundings, your environment, and allowing yourself to respond to that in the moment. Yeah.
What are the most common ways that fear comes up in the improv process?
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of folks really worried about looking ridiculous. I talk about the 2 mantras of improvisation, and I took these from a musical improviser. His name's David Darling. He's a cellist and a musical improv teacher. And he talks about 2 mantras, which are the fool and the baby. So in order to be great improvisers, we have to embrace that fool, right? And not be afraid of looking foolish. And for me, foolish is the same as being vulnerable. Right. So I think when folks are really afraid and have those fear responses, what they're worried about is that something's going to come out of their mouth that's foolish, that's ridiculous, people aren't going to take them seriously. So being a fool is being vulnerable, right? So if we can become more confident ourselves in our vulnerability, nothing will stop us, right? And something that I really have to get people's buy-in with improv is saying, hey, the more foolish you are, the more vulnerable you are, the more accessible you become to people, because we're human beings, right? Something that we practice at Lila, one of our core mission statements is truthfulness, right? That we're honest, because when we're honest and truthful, it just automatically turns that empathy muscle on for people, right? The more honest and pure we are about who we are, people relate to us. Yeah.
Something you said reminds me of, and it's that being a fool. So when you're able to be a fool and you're confident about being a fool, that's the main thing. It's in that body language. Because if you're a fool and you also then second guess yourself immediately, it'd be like, oh, I don't, that makes it sound bad to the audience as well. But it's really that confidence in being able to just be a fool and be totally cool with it and totally in it,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I tell folks, on the improv stage, the audience will go with you wherever you take them. But the only rule against that is if you're not confident in it. If you question or doubt yourself, the audience will smell that out and not trust you.
And that's what I've been noticing in doing improv is how people want to like you and they want to support you. Right. And this thing in my head, and I'm sure it's in other people's heads that oh no, they're all going to hate me and they're all going to think I'm doing the wrong thing, or I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, what's so cool about the art form of theater is that the minute you step on the stage, you have the audience in your hands, right? It's like a canvas. The stage is a canvas. Like they're set up to watch you. There's a square box that they have to look at, and they're sitting in the audience, and there's nowhere for them to go. So they have to watch you. You have their attention. So all you have to do is just accept it. Right? Accept that they're watching it, accept it for yourself, and confidently be there. Yeah.
And can you talk about how you started Lila and specifically how you came up with the name Lila?
Yeah. So my husband and we founded the company together in 2003. And I first, I guess, pretty seriously started studying improv in college, and that's where I met my husband. We were both in a college improv troupe at University of Florida, and I was really into the psychology of improv, all that kind of stuff. So we moved out to San Francisco in 2002 to pursue my master's in drama therapy degree. So I'm also a marriage and family therapist and drama therapist. And while I was going through that process, I was reading a book about improvisation. It's by Stephen Nachmanovich. It's called Free Play. And it was just like an analysis of how improvisation is used in different art forms like music and dance and expressive arts. In the very first chapter of the book, he talks about this word Lila, which means play. And it's a Sanskrit word for play. And I was really called to what that improv could be more than just entertainment. I've seen a lot of improv in college for comedy's sake, and Second City was very popular, and all these improv training centers was very popular for the sake of entertainment. But for me, improv was a lot more meaningful. It was more spiritual to me. It was more about connection between human beings, and by pursuing that process of play, you can get a really entertaining byproduct, right? Rather than like going for the product of humor or funny or comedy, I want to go for the process of connection and truth and vulnerability, and that byproduct can be entertaining.
So what is as somebody who kind of brings this into people's lives, particularly couples, and in a therapeutic context, what is the line between therapy and entertainment?
Yeah, this is a line that I've been grappling with for years, and I still grapple with my company, because I really want to walk that line with Lila. Also, the reason we chose Lila was it's a woman's name as well, so I really wanted to bring that kind of like feminine aspect to improv as well. Coming from improv, not to knock the boys at all, but it had a very kind of masculine energy of like competitive, and there were a lot more men who would do comedy than women. And I wanted I saw so many women coming to improv saying, I want to learn how this can help me with my relationships. I want to learn how this can help me be a better human being for personal growth. So there was more of this kind of maternal energy to it. I'm sorry, I kind of tangented in a little bit. No problem. Therapeutic. Yeah, therapeutic. So I've been walking that line for a long time, and we get a lot of folks in our community who are coming here for personal growth reasons. And the way that we have kind of separated it out for folks at our training center is level 1 through 4 is a more holistic type of improv training where we can work with any kind of goal. People want to work on their relationships or their public speaking skills or be a better actor, whatever, we can all work on this together. And then at a certain point in our training program, we say, hey, if you want to get on stage, we also need to work on your stage craft as well. So really make sure that you're working on your instrument as an actor for the purpose of entertaining an audience as well, and having a product. So this is where I talk about like how improv, at least for the performance sake, is where process and product merge. So you need to both be working on that internal process of your inner critic and making sure that you're working on your own creativity and how to be free in your own creativity. And we're also working on the product, like dressing nice and developing your instrument and taking notes from your director from a performance space, right? So both need to be happening on the improv stage. Yeah.
And that's really interesting, because that kind of goes back to a lot of what people in the yoga world talk about, which is the external and the internal. Most of the time we're only focused on the external, the senses, all the information coming in through the senses. But what you're talking about is also focusing on that internal, the process, like what is this voice inside of my head that tells me I'm doing it wrong or doing it right or doing it whatever. So what are some effective strategies that either you use with your clients or you use with people in an improv space or you use with yourself when it comes to the inner critic, and not really silencing the inner critic, because you can't, I mean, because it's there.
Exactly. Yeah. I often joke with my students, like, we can't silence the inner critic. We can't turn it off. It's there for a reason. Otherwise we'd be psychopaths. We don't want to be psychopaths. But what we can do is, we can turn the volume down, and then also we need a replacement voice. So what we do a lot of improv is we build up the inner cheerleader. So we can't, in order to have something that can counter the inner critic, we need somebody to give us that cheerleading support for our ideas, right? So that phrase yes and, that so many people are aware of now, comes from improv. So that first part, that yes, is we need to learn to be able to say a big, huge celebratory yes to our own ideas, right? And often with improv, because it's a collaborative art form, sometimes the key for a lot of people who have like a really fierce inner critic is they are better at saying yes to other people's ideas. So the more they practice saying yes to their teammates' ideas, it starts to come into their own space too. And then they're also getting a lot of yes from their classmates as well. So even if they can't believe their own yes for themselves at first, it's coming from their teammates, and they're also practicing saying it to their teammates as well.
That's a very interesting thing, because that ties in directly with people who offer services in massage, bodywork, yoga, meditation, is that often they find this work because they've been wounded in themselves. And so that they have a huge inner critic, and oftentimes, and then through this work, discover how powerful it is for themselves, give it to other people, but they still at their very core have this sense of lack, and it prevents them from being able to do the business side of it and really having this confidence to say, yes, I am really good at this, and offer that services,
Yeah, like for a lot of folks that struggle with imposter syndrome, it's like, it's literally impossible to say yes to you being good enough, smart enough, creative enough. Like, so it's a practice, right? It's practice. And often people with imposter syndrome, the way to help them is to say, well, don't you think that your friends' ideas were awesome? Oh yeah. Well, do you trust your friend? Oh yeah, I trust their wisdom. I trust what they have to say. Well, they just said yes to your idea in your improv class. Can't you trust their ability to assess that? So that's often the way to get through folks with imposter syndrome, is like allowing them to trust other people's opinion of them. Yeah. Yeah.
And then why do some people develop this maybe louder inner critic than other people? Why do some people have a tendency to develop a louder or more strict or more kind of disciplinarian inner critic than other people?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've worked a lot with as a therapist, I've worked a lot as a play therapist. So I've worked with very young kids. And now being a mom of a little
Yeah.
2-year-old and seeing her start to play and play pretend, I'm really, really conscious of making sure that I'm yesing her creative ideas, right? That it's really me supporting her idea. So as she's playing, maybe she's playing with, she has these little puppy dog finger puppets she's likes to play with. Rather than inputting my own creative idea on her process, I'm yes-anding her ideas. So I think it's really important as kids develop that we follow their play, and we help them internalize that their ideas are right. This is what I say in my improv classes all the time. Your ideas are right, they're true, they're perfect. And really instilling their confidence in whatever's coming from them authentically is right. Yeah. And I also think, we live in a society where the school system is weird, and there's a lot of testing and a lot of ways that the creative process is hampered down. So hopefully more schools have more funding for arts these days, and we can support our kids that way. Yeah.
So essentially, it's probably as people inner critic get larger or more intense due to maybe a parent not really following their when they were younger, not really having that opportunity to have a parental figure look at what they're doing and say, oh man, that's amazing, or like really encouraging them, or maybe not even quite being there. And then also once the child is above a certain age, goes into the school system, and the school system is constantly comparing them and saying, this person, you got an A, but you didn't really do this, so you got a B, and not really giving that chance. Because when we're younger, we have that chance to be authentic, but then at a certain point, we then get put into the system that then defines what is right and what is wrong, and kind of says you'll play a better role in society if you get this right. So get this right, and then
Yeah, and it's interesting, like with men and women lately, I've been reading some articles about, how a lot of girls, when they're growing up in school, like they tend to doubt themselves even more. Like I definitely was that kid that, would just obsess over the right answer on my homework and would never trust my intuition and have to ask my parents, is this the right answer? So there's a lot of interesting data about how girls go through school and how they start to doubt themselves as they go through school, where a lot of times boys are more encouraged to just try again. Girls feel like they have to do it perfectly the first time.
So what is one of the biggest kind of success stories you've seen someone have from going through improv?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. And there's a joke that I have at the end of our improv 1 classes. I'll often say, like, okay, who's quitting their job? Who's partner? Like who's moving, who's going through a huge life shift right now. Because I get that so often, that people like go through these huge life shifts in improv. And I believe what happens is they're so used to being so authentically themselves, so purely themselves in improv class, that when they go outside of that space, it's like, it's like you're allergic to it. It's like your body cannot handle it anymore, of being so untrue to yourself. I had this one woman, after her first class in improv 1, she came back the next week and she's like, I just had this horrible experience at work. And I said, what? She's like, I just broke down in tears at work. And I was like, well, what happened? And she said, well, after our first improv 1 class together with a complete group of strangers, just spending 3 hours with them, I felt more supported by those group of people than my coworkers of 15 years. And she's like, it was just such a stark difference. Like I went into work the next day and felt so totally unsupported. And the stranger that I just met yesterday, these strangers for 3 hours supported me more than my coworkers of 15 years. But
yeah, and this is reminding me, it just brought to mind that during those 2 to 3 hours of doing improv, there is no technology in the room as well, or there is nobody is on their phone except for maybe in the break. But and it seems to tap into something which is very old in us, which is to really enjoy being in social interaction, but not only social interaction, because a lot of people in cities today go out to dinners with each other and do all these things, but this really like dedicated sense of play and sense of community in that space.
Right.
It's something that's really old and that seems to be getting replaced by technology, or kind of moved out of the way by technology. Because now when we're in entertainment kind of settings, or it's focused on the technology as the deliverer of entertainment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so interesting. It's like, yeah, we need that real like air time. I don't know how else to describe it. We need to breathe the same air together,
Mm-hmm.
I even think about like, right now we're talking through Zoom, which is awesome. It's an incredible technology, but how much I would just love to like look at your eyes, and not just on the screen, but breathe the same air together, because there's an energy exchange that happens. I've talked to a few improvisers that are really interested, especially in San Francisco, like, oh, I want to put improv online. And I'm just like, okay, maybe I'm an old lady now, but like, I'm never taking away from the purity of this art form if you do that. Like, improv is meant to be enjoyed in community. We need to be together in the same airspace and energy exchange.
I want to share, when I first started getting into improv about a month ago, before that, last year, I've started to get into dance. And
cool.
The dance part is really interesting, because there is structured dance where you go to a class, a hip hop class, and you follow the teacher. But then there's also unstructured dance, ecstatic dance here in San Francisco, and some other forms as well, which is unstructured and, no leading, and you just kind of follow your own intuition.
Yeah.
But I was noticing that I've loved this process that I've gone through over the past year, which is essentially just opening myself up in a movement somatic way of moving around in a way that's kind of open and free. But I still wasn't able to play with people in this sense, in this verbal kind of linguistic or silliness. And improv seems to be fitting into that hole that I had previously. So it's really interesting. Do you have a dance? Do you dance at all? Or?
Yeah, I have a really large dance background, and I haven't done it in a while, but I used to do a lot of ecstatic dance and improv, contact improv and stuff like that. Yeah, it's really cool. What's fun about theater is it is all encompassing. You have to be able to work your muscle as a mover. You have to be physically equipped. You have to use your voice. You have to also be able to connect with others. It's a kind of all-encompassing art form that really taps into imagination as well. So yeah, it's neat.
So let's talk about some of the individual stresses that you face in your creative endeavors. For example, creating this festival that you're about to create. What is the most stressful thing about that?
Yeah, I think unfortunately we don't have the biggest budget, so we're still like in a grassroots effort, and we don't have a ton of sponsorship, stuff like that. So that's like always the big stress for me is budget. Everything's very expensive in San Francisco. We got to pay for the theater, we're paying workshop instructors to come out from all over the country, so there's a lot of expenses. And then a lot of what creates a festival is a lot of the production aspects of it, and a lot of that is volunteer, and everybody's bandwidth is very thin. So cost money. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is probably the most stressful. Besides death, besides public speaking, money probably comes in there right in third place, probably, in terms of stressful stuff. How do you get volunteers to help you work? Like how does that work?
It literally just comes from our improv community. Like I tell folks about it and ask folks if they want to support the cause, because it is something that a lot of, especially women improvisers, are really passionate about. And the first year I did it, I remember going, gosh, I didn't know of that many improv or comedy festivals that were just for women. And I was like, I don't even know if I could have a festival with enough all women groups, is this even possible? So the first year I did, I was like, hey, we might have to accept every group that applies. Because but it was amazing how many women groups there are all across the country. And we had a full festival the first year. We had to actually deny some groups, which was not fun, but we had A lot of people. Yeah. And every year we just get more and more and more submissions. And this year is our first year that we're actually finding strategic ways to have some male allies involved.
Mm.
We have a couple producers that are men. We have some performers that are male identified, some other support positions, and how we can have our allies involved more in the cause. Yeah.
Interesting. And how many people came last year? How many people do you have set for this time?
As far as performers?
Or no, just in general, like the whole thing. How big is it?
Oh, so I don't have the account of like attendees in my
Yeah.
head. We have it's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights. And those are when the performances happen. So there's I think this year we have 21 groups and 8 solo performers. So we'll have solo performers that act as like MCs. We call them our femcs. So they act as like hosts for each show block. Yeah. And then we have every year we've had just like packed audiences. It's been really cool. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So when is it again? What dates?
So April 25th through the 28th. And it's at Exit Theater in downtown San Francisco. Yeah.
And then what is the name again? Femfest?
Femprovisor Fest.
Femprovisor, yeah. Femprovisor Fest. So yeah, and so we got about 5 minutes left. Is there one article, book, idea that you've come across that has enabled you to become more creative or less stressed in the last month?
Yeah, I was hoping I was going to be able to say this one quote. There's an improv teacher. He's actually no longer with us. His name is Martin DeMott. But he was a teacher out of the Second City for many years. And he has this really beautiful quote I want to share with you all, which is, I think many of us go through our life not fully having permission to be who we are and what we're going to become. Most of us are often looking for approval. We hate it when we're not approved of. It's that approval that has us in our minds worrying about what we're doing as we're doing it, trying to figure out whether or not it's appropriate or will be accepted. We walk through our lives like we're on our first date, trying to see if we're appropriate and trying not to step on other people's toes, cautiously, prophylactically, for fear of not being approved of. In this work, there's only approval. I just, that's improv, Yeah.
Yeah. And particularly with Lila, it seems like you guys have set up that very intentionally within the improv space, because at the end you have a time that everybody can share what they're working on. Yeah. And usually that's something that in our culture, we're supposed to be very modest and humble and not really talk about what we're doing. And so it's really cool that you guys offer that space for people to really share what they're working on, or even share, just needing something from the community, like a roommate or anything like that.
Exactly. Really cool. We need to definitely, in the city of San Francisco, we need to carve space for community, how we all help each other. Yeah.
And how long have you lived in San Francisco?
Since 2002. Yeah.
2002. Yeah. Yeah. So that was right after the tech collapse. So it was like the last span of San Francisco as a city before technology has really kind of changed the dynamics of it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Going on. Yeah. It's been awesome for improv, though. I feel like there's a lot of folks that are moving here that really want and need in their lives. So it's been good.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, before we stop, is there anything you wanted to say, you wanted to share with San Francisco or our listeners?
I just invite everybody who's listening to find a way to say yes to yourself today. I know personally I can get into my inner critic, still even being an improviser, I can get into my inner critic about things that I haven't done today or didn't do well. But if there's one thing you can say yes that was perfect and right and true and was expressing yourself authentically, see if you can say yes to it.
Cool. And then, if you're interested in what's the name of the conference again? Or the
festival, it's called Femprovisor Fest, and that's spelled FEMPROVISOR Fest.com. And then Lila, which is also produces Femprovisor Fest, which is the company I founded with my husband, is LEELA-SF.com.
And if you want to join me, I'll be going every Monday and Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m.
Yay, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a drop-in improv class that I've been going to for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and it's really fun. Great way to kind of just laugh a lot, which is really fun and important for our nervous system.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure interviewing you.
Me too. I could talk about improv all day.
Well, we can do it again.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.